The deal with this project is that we have had the same high table in our kitchen for over a decade, and it's really small. It's never been big enough to have company over. It's really never been even big enough just for a couple of us, or all 3 or 4 of us. So anyway, Melissa once in a while talks about buying a table, and I usually freak out about that and say I'm going to build one. But she sounded a little bit more serious lately about buying a table, so I finally doubled down and decided to build one. And I really kind of like these plywood and steel combo designs, so I thought I'd make a plywood steel high top table. So this baby is 45 inches by 45 inches. That's the top, like the size of the top. And then it's counter height, so it's just like between 36 inches, 37 inches, kind of depending on how you adjust it. So I got started, as you've seen here, with some pretty high quality plywood. If you're going to build furniture out of plywood, you might as well use some good stuff. And I made a double thick top. It doesn't really need that. I just think it sort of looks better, sort of like spiritually needs that double thick top. So got the top glued up and then started cutting some pieces for the legs. You'll see that these legs are not just totally straight. I created a sort of tapered jig on the table saw, and with that tapered jig it allows you to cut some kind of angles for those legs. So they have, they have like a little bit of a slope to them, and there are 2 pieces for each leg, so 4 legs, 8 pieces each. It's not a whole lot of cutting overall, and the tapered jig ended up working out pretty good. You can also see that this project is taking place in my mini shop. This is like the shop I've used for the last 10 years. It's a 1-car garage, and man, I have loved that place and made the most of it and just done so much cool stuff in there. You can also see that it's pretty jammed up with stuff. It's pretty full. In the middle of this project, we found another house, the kind of house we've been looking for in town just forever, and we ended up moving. And the table went on ice, and you'll see what happens. It gets kind of crazy. The table project went on ice and is actually completed in the new shop. So a lot of what you see here is in the old shop, and then I finish up the table in the new shop. Anyway, the legs themselves, how am I making these? They're just glued together with some biscuits. The biscuits just give them a little bit more strength. You can screw them. You could fasten them using a Craig fastener. You could do a lot of different stuff, but I did glue and biscuits. I just want to see those. I didn't want to see the fasteners on the outside of the legs. And glue means it's a chance to use like every single clamp in my clamp collection, which is a rare occurrence, and I had some fun with that. Alright, so with the legs completed, all 4 of them put together, I went to work on the structure underneath the table to attach the legs. And if you build tables, or you've seen a bunch of table build videos or plans and things like that, there's a lot of ways to do this. I've done it this way a couple times, and it's pretty simple. Basically, I just affixed a simple little frame underneath that is sort of invisible, and then put a few more pieces of plywood, as you can see here, around that frame, just to kind of visually tie the legs in together, make them look like they're all kind of part of the same structure. The legs, as you'll see in a second, attach to that frame behind the plywood. That frame behind the plywood, I think it's just a 2x2 or close to a 2x2. I might have ripped it down out of a 2x4. But the plywood is all glued to the front, and you can see it sort of visually, just sort of looks better than that janky old 2x2 in the background. Now the legs still are not attached. They're just sitting there, and I kept knocking them over during the project. I should have attached them sooner, but after I get this glued up, I think the next thing I do is attach the legs. And the way I did that is with some big old oversized bolts. Some of the things in this project are not necessarily to scale. Like, I didn't need to use the size bolts that I did, and that's true with some of the other fasteners and casters and whatnot. I just wanted this table to have a kind of big chunky look to it. You know, so I used big bolts. That's why I doubled up the size of the top. And you'll see later I got these kind of big casters that are like rated up to 1,000 pounds or something. Totally unnecessary overkill, but in my opinion it just kind of makes for that kind of industrial heavy-duty look for the table. Okay, now this section of the video is just a total screw up, but I put it in here just to kind of talk through my process. What I did is I took an old bed frame and I was trying to make a footrail out of it, and I cut it up, and then I actually need to weld some sections together. You know, a lot of times when you're using old stuff, it's a little bit more work, and I don't mind that at all. Like, that's really fun. I was really glad to upcycle this old bed frame. But what I started doing is I started sanding and grinding it to get that sort of black patina off of it and get it down to a nice silver. I thought that shiny silver would look cool. I also busted out my welder and spot welded in the holes on the frame. I just wanted to fill in those holes. So I welded those holes in, and then after the holes were welded in, I got the grinder out and ground them down smooth, you know, got them all pretty. And then you'll see in a second, I got my sander out, my disc sander, and I blasted these things with the sander. Now, this is the grinding portion. The sander and the grinder and just all that work I did on this steel heated that stuff up a lot. And, you know, I've been welding for a few years, but I'm a little bit of a noob. I will admit that here. And all this sanding and all this grinding ended up hardening the steel. It's just, you know, that's the way steel works. You heat it up to a specific temperature and that stuff will become hardened, which is really cool unless you want to drill it. So I went to drill holes in the ends of these bed frame pieces, and I just trashed like 2 or 3 drill bits. The drill bits were just not going through. I could go through a little bit of the interior steel that hadn't been heated as much, but the outside was just like armor, you know, like plate armor, and I couldn't get through it. So I took my torch and I think it's called spot annealing. I spot annealed it. Basically, I heated it up thinking I would get my drill through it, but I still couldn't get my drill through it. Ultimately, I did get through it with my step bit, which I didn't show here, but at that point, I was just totally sick of this bed rail situation, and I went to the steel yard. And at the steel yard, I bought some square tubing, as maybe I should have in the first place, and I fabricated a simple footrail out of square tubing with that newer steel. So the upcycling thing failed. I'm sure I'll use those things for something else. But as I said, right in the middle of this project, boom, we ended up moving. And this is the new shop. It's huge. It's like way bigger than my other shop. I'm still figuring it out. I'm still getting used to working in it, and it needs to be tricked out a lot. But in the moving truck, like buried away, was the table, and that thing actually held a bunch of boxes and weight and stuff like that. But anyway, we pulled that thing out of the moving truck and stuck it in the shop, and it kind of sat there for a few weeks. I got to admit, I didn't get working right away on that table. There were so many other things to do, a few different jobs and projects and whatnot. But finally, this past week, I got back to the table, and I pulled it out and pulled it, actually rolled it around outside. There's kind of like a cool outside area where I can work because I wanted to do some sanding, and I wanted to kind of get it cleaned up. It really just needed some finishing touches. So the first thing I did is sand it, and there were some scratches and nicks on it, some sort of bumps from the move and whatnot, and those sanded out really well. And then after that, I wanted to get that steel footrail tuned up. And you'll see here that there's just a couple things I missed in this video. I added these casters, and these are some cheapos I got on Amazon. I think they were like 10 or 20 bucks. Anyway, I also pulled off this footrail that I fabricated, and I sanded it, and then I hit it with some acetone. Acetone is just great for cleaning up steel, especially if your steel has that oil on it. And while the dogs wrestled with the football, I got that thing cleaned up, and after sanding it and acetoning it and all that, the dogs chilled, and I put a clear coat on it. I wanted it to look sort of like the original steel, but a clear coat's nice because it will keep it from rusting and getting kind of nasty over time. All right, one more little touch. I have these little steel corners. I've had them in my my toolbox for probably 15 or 20 years. I pulled them off a box that I bought back in Oregon, like in the 90s. It was a long time ago. And I wanted to use them. This table seems perfect, so I took all 4 of them. I cleaned them up a little bit, not too much. I wanted them to look kind of old and industrial and scuffed up. And I put them on the table, and then I trimmed them down just to the size of the tabletop, and they look really great. That tabletop is 1.5 inches, and it just, I think little touches like that really add a lot to a project like this. Then I mixed up an epoxy finish, which takes quite a bit of mixing. You gotta like mix it for 3 minutes, then pour it into another container, mix it for 3 more minutes. And I took 2 coats of it. The first is kind of like a seal coat. A lot of that plywood kind of soaked it up. And then the second coat put a big kind of finish on it. At that point, Melissa was nice enough to move the table into the new house. This is the table that was supposed to be for the old house, but it didn't really work out there. She was also nice enough to move one of her many spinning wheels out of the way, as you might have just noticed. She's got a cool collection of old spinning wheels. Of that much frustration in the user. I kind of wish there was like an X of them. I think it's a really cool table. I'm not sure if it's going to stay here in our house or go somewhere else. We're still kind of figuring out the furniture situation. But it is nice and big. Like I said, 45 inches by 45 inches on the top, and has that kind of crazy tough finish on top. Like there's sort of an indestructible finish. So no need to use coasters or anything like that. All right, thanks for checking out the project. I hope you get a chance to do something cool, and I will see you in the next video.